Hi everybody, welcome to Feed Talk Part 2. I don't know if you can remember the previous one we had just before Christmas, which was about feeding and weight and what to put in buckets, and how that both the weight of our ponies and the weight of the feed is massively important. Now, what we're going to do is move on from that, because there was a couple of different ways I was going to go today. We were going to talk just about workload, but I decided that because of the time of year and because of the sort of prevalence of obesity problems, I thought I'd go down let's focus on a bit of sort of obesity, laminitis, and what we can do about using weight and workload in this sort of time of year, especially with the weather we've got at the moment, to try and trim some weight off and see where we can go. So there we go. So obviously, in order to manage our pony's weight, it's not just about one thing alone. It's all about obviously the feed they eat, the workload they do, and also the rugs they wear. Now, given that, yeah, we'll have a look at what I call my feed pyramid later on, and it's not just about bucket feed. Now, last week I joined on a webinar about the great weight debate. Now, that was absolutely fascinating because there were some really interesting points in there. There was people from the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, there was World Horse Welfare, there was a livery yard owner, there was a horse owner who had a native pony. Now, we've actually got a bit of a crisis in this country at the moment, and it is a little bit like the pandemic. We're all used to the word pandemic now. Obviously, it's nowhere near as severe as coronavirus, but it is a big epidemic or pandemic. Out of the about 890,000 horses that are currently in the UK, about a third of them, nearly 250,000 of them, are classified as obese. Now, one point that one of the girls from World Horse Welfare raised last week was that last year they often get calls, and they get calls a lot about underweight horses. Now, they had 658 calls about underweight horses, and yet only 58 calls about overweight horses. Now, obesity is actually more of a problem than underweight. So what we're trying to do, and a project that I'm working on and in line with my vets as well, is trying to tackle how do we deal with and how do we start the conversation about obesity. And it's not about fat shaming, it's not about telling people, oh, your pony's fat, and it's, you know, there's going to be all sorts of problems. It's just recognizing what are the factors that lead horses to get fat. I mean, a lot of people come to me and say, my pony lives on fresh air and it's just fat. And it is so difficult, so difficult to get weight off. You know, there's grazing muzzles, there's small hold hay nets, which aren't particularly good for their teeth. There's an awful lot of things that we can do, but it is really hard work. So if we can prevent it and we can stop these things becoming a problem before they become a problem, then you save yourself a lot of heartache, a lot of effort, a lot of money in a lot of cases, and you know, you make your life an awful lot easier. So what we're going to look at is the problems caused by obesity in horses. Now, obviously everybody's heard about laminitis, and problems such as insulin dysregulation, another word for a bit like diabetes really, and insulin resistance. Well, insulin is actually a hormone that is sent out by the pituitary gland, and it is sent out, a hormone is sent out and it triggers the pancreas to release insulin. Now, insulin is like a big mop, and as soon as a horse eats, what it does is that any sugar and starch in that food, whether it be the grass, whether it be hay, anything else, the insulin will actually go round, mop it all up, package it up, and put it away before it gets to the hindgut. Now, we'll come on to it in a minute as what the problems are with that. So this is one of the problems that happens with obesity, and actually some of the fat cells will give off a bit more of this hormone. So this all triggers the whole sequence of events, trips on from obesity. Obviously, the more weight you carry, the more joint problems you're going to get. Reproductive disorders in stud farms, obviously they manage horses' weight very, very strictly. They have problems in regulating their body temperature, because when we looked at the body condition score last just before Christmas, horses store fat in a lot of different ways. So they could have fat pads by the saddle, on their shoulders, above their tail. Now, this is called regional adiposity. Now, you don't have to run with that. But they basically are little pockets of fat. Now, given that they're going to be distributed throughout the horse's body, it makes the horse really difficult to actually regulate its temperature, because it's going to have some parts of its body where it's going to be fat, and fat is a very, very good insulator. So it makes it really difficult for the horses. It can also cause colic, because again, along with poor performance, if you've got big pockets of fat, and you've got fat stored in places around the liver, you've got it stored around major organs, it actually makes it really difficult for the horse to expand its lungs and actually perform to its optimum level. And then obviously, as the pony gets older, there'll be problems that lead on from the likes of laminitis, which is problems called like Cushing's disease and equine metabolic disorders. Now, although those are often lumped in with laminitis, they are slightly different. Okay, so moving on, we'll have a quick look at laminitis. Now, laminitis is a whole topic in itself, and it's such a horrible disease, and sadly it's occurring all too often. Now, when I've spoken to vets, a lot of vets have said to me that what they find is there's a real problem when they try to talk to people and talk to owners about having tubby ponies, in a sense. And people will actually change their vet if they think the vet has basically told them they've got a fat pony, which is really quite sad, because the vet is there to try and help, and the vet's there to cure these problems. But in a lot of cases, they actually only get listened to once the pony's crippled and in a stable and can't move. So the prevalence of laminitis, it really is a management issue. And as hard as that is, and you can, one minute the pony's fine, and the next minute it can't walk, but it always does all just come down to what it's eating. And again, it's not just about bucket feed. Because of our ponies, the way our ponies are built, their small intestine is about 60 or 70 foot long. Now, but it goes really quickly. It's like having a motorway. The small intestine's a motorway, if you like, and the hindgut is like a village lane. Okay, so in terms of speed, food will come out of the stomach relatively quickly, and it gets onto the motorway, and it goes really fast. And in some cases, between sort of 45 minutes to 90 minutes, food's passed through. Now, an awful lot's got to happen in the small intestine in that time. It's got to absorb all the vitamins and minerals, break down all of the fats, act on all of the proteins, and it's got to get rid of all that sugar and starch and absorb a lot of water. So there's an awful lot going on in that time. So if we have a meal that is too big, or too heavily loaded in terms of starch and sugar, then the speed that it goes through actually can mean that some of it's missed. Now, sugar and starch gets absorbed. So all of the activity that happens in the small intestine is absorption. The hindgut is fermentation. The small intestine is absorption. So we need all of that sugar and starch to be mopped up by the insulin and packaged away. And it gets put away into the liver, the blood, and the muscles, okay, to be used as energy. So, and this is your fast release energy. Hence why if you eat a high sugar starch meal, you can get your horse fizzy, because it's packed relatively close to where it's going to be quickly needed. But this is the problem. If it goes slamming into the hindgut and it hasn't been digested at that point, it goes through into the hindgut, and everything then slows down, and it has to be fermented. And all of the inhabitants of that hindgut, all this a proper little village in itself, and all of those inhabitants in the hindgut, all of those little microorganisms that live there, they all put their hands up and say, well, we don't know what to do with it, because they're designed to ferment fibre, and all the grass and all the stalky bits and all the tough chewy bits, and all of this sugar and starch turns up. It's like somebody walks in with a truckload of cream eggs and dumps them in your door, and everyone says, well, I don't know what to do with it. No, nothing to do with me. So this then triggers a whole sequence of events. So the ultimate culmination of those events is inflammation in the feet. That's where it manifests itself, and that's mostly where most people realize we've got a big problem. So basically what you get is, I'll show you a picture in a minute of what the actual horse's hoof looks like on the inside, and it really is an emergency. So the more we can do to eliminate it or stop it happening in the first place, the better. And this time of year, which is why I wanted to talk to you about this today, this time of year is literally, we've got time to start catching it. We're not too far away from the grass growing. I know, given the current temperature, it really don't feel like we're going anywhere near spring at the moment. But, we've had 15, 18, 20 degrees in February and into March. And we could be looking at, we've got a high water table, so there's a lot of water around. Most fields look like the swamps, look like there should be hippos in them, not horses. And we've almost got a ticking time bomb coming at us. So with the weather at the moment, we've actually not got, apart from a little bit of snow, we've actually not got a huge amount of bad weather other than cold weather. Now's the time to pull the rugs off. Now's the time, if you've got a fat pony that you've body condition scored him and you've got your weigh tape out and he's looking a little bit tubby, and by all means give me a call and say, well, is this on the weigh tape? What do you think? Then we've got things in the toolkit that we can use. So obviously watching what they eat, increase the exercise when you can get out, and reduce the rugs. So this, apologies if this kind of makes anybody feel a little bit icky. What we've got here is, this is what the normal hoof should look like. Now inside, obviously we all know where the coronet band is, where we put our hoof oil up to. Okay. Now all of the laminae in the foot look like little ribbons. They're like little sheets of paper, very, very thin little ribbons. And inside there is what we call the pedal bone. Now that's the pointy, what used to be the third toe, okay? Many, 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 many years ago, far way back in evolution. And so all of these little structures, they support that bone and keep it at a nice level to the ground, okay? Now, sadly, the problem with laminitis, it actually starts to break these. And if you imagine, you look at that and you've got an absolute sealed capsule here with the hoof. And when this foot swells up with laminitis, these laminae haven't got anywhere to go. And it's like having an infection under a fingernail, and it just pushes against the hoof wall. But of course, as this tries to push outwards, it's pushing the bone backwards and down, okay? And this is what you see here. And these laminae actually start to break. And often when your farrier will come, he will say, he can tell instantly by the rings on the horse's feet whether it's had laminitis. So what we've really got to do is, because this damage is irreversible, if this damage, if it's allowed to continue, then it really, really isn't good news for the pony. And after each bout of laminitis, it doesn't spring back. You won't get from there to there, you know, bad foot to good foot. You don't return to the start point. So yes, if a pony's had laminitis, that's fine, it happens. But what we've really got to make sure and really got to focus management on is not letting it happen again. Because gradually over time, it's not like having a headache when take a few paracetamol, it's gone, bang, you know. So this it's quite a graphic picture, but I thought it was quite useful to have a look at and see exactly what's going on inside the foot. And as I've said, you know, cases of laminitis have increased enormously over the last 20 years. And I think the problem is that we've got a lot of lovely green grass, we've got a lot of lovely green fields, our grazing is better, our fertilizers are better. Hay and haylage is now so much nicer than it used to be. When I had ponies when I was 5 years old, laminitis was never a thing. And you know, the hay was pretty rank, but the ponies would eat it. Also, big companies now have got involved in the feeding. They've realised that the equine market is a bit of a like raiding your piggy bank. They know that by having very clever marketing and advertising and poking people and saying, oh, look at our product, look at our product, we're kind of adding to the pony's diet all the time. You see it on Facebook a lot where people are saying, what else do I feed my horse? My horse is this. What do you think? And I scroll through 100, 200 comments and just despair, because everybody's giving an opinion and none of them actually take into account the history of that horse. Somebody did put up a picture of a very, very handsome horse the other day. Beautiful, new Irish sports horse. And I thought, stunning, perfect figure. And she was saying, I need to put some weight on it. And in the end, I ended up private messaging her and saying, look, I'm really sorry, you're going to get deluged. What you're feeding is absolutely correct. And I really wouldn't add any more to it. Leave her as she is. Anyway, so she decided to stay. So anyway, we're enticed to add more, okay? And we think that it's going to help the ponies jump higher or go faster or compete better. And actually it probably doesn't, because too many little things in a bucket doesn't actually add up to the added benefit that you think it's going to. Okay, and now obviously I'm not going to do myself out of selling rugs, but we do all have lots of that, and I've got 20 rugs. And I probably wouldn't have those rugs if I didn't have the shop, because I probably wouldn't go and spend that amount of money on them. But we do buy lots of lovely rugs, and it's very easy to think that, you know, it's cold outside, therefore we need to wrap them up and we need to put them in a nice warm stable. And to be honest, putting them in the stable actually is probably the equivalent of you going sitting in your garden shed, and it's actually not going to make you any warmer, because it's actually quite cold sitting out in the garden shed, because you're still cold, you're still outside, you're just not, you know, out in the wind. So as I said, we can't, sorry, I've just had a weird strange message pop up on my computer, I don't know what it's doing now. So we can actually stop this, okay? This is what I like to call the feed pyramid, and I draw it a lot in the shop. When we talk about what we're feeding our horses, a lot of focus is on bucket feed. Now, the horse's diet is so much more than just their bucket feed. They get a lot of, obviously, grass turnout. We get a lot of hay and, you know, whatever else we feed them. They eat their bedding, blah, blah, blah. And then they get their bucket feed, and then they get their treats. So the easiest bit that we can do is manage this part. If we manage this part, then the rest of it is actually, you know, we can leave this to the absolute minimum. We can use a very basic fiber feed with a balancer, and that will cover off all of the needs of the pony. As I said before, and when we looked at weight, you know, the bucket feed, really, if you're being honest and looking at the pony and doing your body condition score and weight aping it, don't be afraid to say, actually, I don't think he needs a bucket feed. You know, you can get away with just giving them a balancer, and that can be fed in a sort of coffee cup size amount twice a day. End of. That will give them minimal calories, maximum vitamins and minerals. So getting this bit right is a massive key to us. Trying to keep as much turnout as possible. Now, some of you have probably got lovely arenas or access to lovely arenas. Now, if your pony is really quite tubby, then putting a hay net in one end of the arena and putting it in the other end of the arena, and making the pony move about, because it's all about keeping them moving. Like my horses aren't going to be laminitic, touch wood, but the more they're out, the more they're moving about, and the harder it is for them to go and find their forage. Okay, it's a bit of a pain for you to put one hay net or at one end of the arena or bottom end of the field. It's just about making it harder for them, and increasing the amount of time they have to move about. It's not about starving them. Starving them really, really is the last resort, and should only ever be really used as a veterinary emergency. And the only time you should ever leave a pony for prolonged lengths of time, probably more than 4 hours without any forage, it should only ever be on the instruction of a vet, because the damage that can be done can potentially outweigh the benefits that you're trying to achieve. So trying to get food into them through different methods is what we're ideally aiming for. So trying to get this is kind of like the holy grail, trying to get this sorted. And I don't think there aren't any hard and fast ways of doing that. I mean, some people, you can bark over an area if you've got the opportunity to cut a piece of a field off and just get a few wagon loads of bark and cover it off. Sometimes that is honestly the best way to do it, and take action now rather than wait until the pony's had laminitis, because you'll always be chasing your tail. So as I said, horses can be very economical, ponies in particular, you think they've put their best into, or you've put your best into a lesson, and the pony's probably put in about 60% and is basically mugging you off a little bit, being a bit cheeky and not actually doing what you really want him to do. But because ponies have evolved to be very economical with their output, because they don't know when a dinosaur is going to pop up, or a bear or a lion or whatever it is that's going to pop up from the nearest wood and start chasing them, they need to conserve that energy. Evolution has also shown that horses generally use the seasons to get fatter during the summer, and then they will store that food, and then they will get thinner in the winter. Nowadays, what we do is we don't want them to get fatter, and we don't want them to get thinner, and we try and smudge off the edges of that. My boys have actually dropped. My boys are probably 20 or 25 to 30 kilos under where they should be, or not where they should be, but where they are if I weight take them at the end of June. Now, I'm not that bothered. They're getting slightly more food, but it's only fibre food, and I've split it out a little bit more, but I'm not reaching for the conditioning feed, because I don't want them to go into spring. Although they're thoroughbreds, they are not immune from laminitis. So, and at some point we're going to move them fields, but again, I want them to go into a field that's, thankfully, I can do that. I've got the opportunity to do that, but it'll be a field that's being grazed. So, and then they will get access to grass very, very carefully. If we suddenly get to spring and all of a sudden the grass starts springing up everywhere, then I will, cut them back down quite dramatically. But that's typically how they do. They tend to wave, and they get fatter and they get thinner, and they get fatter and they get thinner. And this is why we never really had any problems with laminitis, because we didn't really rug them, and they had to use their body, and they shivered when it was really cold. And we panic now if we see a horse shivering. We quick, chuck another rug on. Let them shiver. It's really hard to see. I mean, when we saw poor little Bubble and Squeak, I think Squeak was guilt by association, because Bubble had laminitis and they were clipped 3 years ago, and we were in the same sort of weather that we had, and it was -10, I think, and the sight of the poor Shetland shivering at the back of the stable was heartbreaking, but it had to be done, because the poor lad had laminitis, and we had to get the weight off him. But they're fine. They bounced back. They didn't die from shivering for a few hours. But it is a drastic way to make them lose weight. So basically what I'm trying to say is that the way we manage our horses, we're too kind to them. We love them dearly, and we worry ourselves silly about whether they're cold, whether they're eating the right thing. Everything that we do, we micromanage them. I'm guilty of it myself. I do it myself, and my husband laughs at me because I spout off about all of this to other people and then spend every 5 minutes on a weather app looking at what the weather is. And I think we've got the opportunity now, and what you can do is use the body condition scoring and be really honest about, get your weigh tape out and think, right, okay, if you made note of where your pony was when you did it before Christmas, have a look at them now. Don't be afraid, whilst we've got this chilly weather, drop the rug weights down a little bit. If you think they're a little bit heavy, or you would like them to drop a little bit of weight, knowing that in a few weeks' time we're going to have some quite seriously sugary spring grass, let's start thinking about how we can get some weight off them, because we're not going to get really nasty wet weather. This cold, dry weather is perfect to get weight off. We need to do that now, and if we can do that, then you're going to save yourself an awful lot of time, effort, money going into spring, and a lot of heartbreak as well, because laminitis can be fatal at the end of it. The things because it's about the way we manage them, we're managing what's going to go in their bucket. We now need to look at what they wear and how much they do. This slide, actually, I quite like this slide. A lot of people have seen this, where the poor horse is buckling under the weight of rugs, and it's because the owner is cold, not the horse is cold. The horse probably is not cold at all and could do with 10 of those coming off. But I've seen it all in a lot of places that I go. I watched one lady at a very high-end competition yard, layer upon layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of rugs on a horse. It was only going out for 2 hours. Nothing drastic would have happened to it in that 2 hours if it had half the number of rugs on it. Anyway, so, and I'll quickly run through this. And this is again, he's quickly looking at rugs. Horses have what we call a thermoneutral zone. So basically means they don't feel cold until the temperature gets to pretty much to what it is now. Okay, minus the wind chill. And then they will feel hot over about 25 degrees. So you pretty much your summer holidays weather. In between in that space between 0 degrees and 25 degrees, they're pretty good at managing their own temperature if they're unclipped and they're healthy. Obviously, there's exceptions. Clipped horses, yes, they need help with taking all their fur away. Of course they do. And older horses and those horses have got other underlying health problems. But generally, just because we feel cold, the ponies don't. And don't feel things like their legs or their ears or their face, because what the ponies will do is they will constrict all of their blood vessels, and they will pull all of their nice warm blood up into their core. Their liver is a big source of central heating for them, as is their hindgut. Okay, so the hindgut that's fermenting all that fibre, and the liver, where most of the blood will reside, is a very, very good heating source. So if you want to really tell whether your horse is warm under a rug, put your hand behind his withers, or put your hand up the inside of their back legs, and careful where you stand, because if you've got freezing cold hands, they probably won't thank you for it. And that will tell you whether the pony's hot or cold. If they're too warm, then take the rugs off, especially if they're a bit heavy, knowing that they can cope with this. They can cope with this temperature. Okay, I've just done this. Again, putting too many rugs on can bring on things like colic. Just because we feel cold, it doesn't mean to say the pony will. And I've put my hand under some horses' rugs, and they are getting damp with heat. So we can back off that an awful lot, and especially with lots of you will have ponies that aren't clipped. Even if they've got a little bib clip, they really don't need much more than probably a medium weight. I mean, I've been asked for heavyweight rugs for Shetlands, which I flatly refuse to stock because they don't need them. So wet weather is a little bit difficult. If it's really, really nasty, icy cold wet weather, then yes. But 9 times out of 10, this sort of temperature is ideal for getting them weight off. Now, again, very, very quickly, lastly, because I kind of got carried away on laminitis. When you read the back of a feed bag, it will ask what sort of workload your horse is doing. And again, we all get a little bit overexcited and think, oh, my horse works really, really hard. I ride him 3 times a week. That's not really hard work. Most ponies, and especially most times in the winter, a lot of people aren't getting much more than light work to medium work. Obviously there are exceptions. I'd say Hayley Rosie is probably getting ridden a little bit more than that, but and especially in preparation for the competition season. But most ponies are kind of in the light to medium work, so don't be tempted to increase the feed in anticipation of work. Wait until you've gone into work. Wait until you've started working the pony a little bit more and increasing the exercise, especially. And with exercise, use long, slow warm-ups. A lot of people do a quick 10-minute round the school, warm up, bang, pony's done. If you want to get weight off, because you want to bring the fat into being burned off, don't go galloping up a hill and don't charge around at 90 miles an hour. Lots of stop-start and slow work. If you use lots of slow work, you're just going to stay this side of the pony getting worn out. If you can stay this side of the pony hitting the wall, then you'll get into fat burn. Fat burning takes a good 35 to 40 minutes of walk, trot, walk, trot, walk, trot, little bit of canter, come back again, walk, trot. All of those transitions, if you want to get weight off, do long, slow rides. Oh, there we go, backwards. So basically, really to sum up, if the pony's only ridden a little bit and is a little bit tubby, then back off the feed, lower the rugs, increase the exercise. Because at the end of the day, you've got things in your toolkit that you can use to start getting weight off and getting the horse prepped for summer and spring and all of this lovely grass we're going to get. Because every single thing that goes into your pony either needs to be used or stored. There's only 2 ways for it. So it can either be stuffed in and put into little packages and deposited around the body, or it will come out as energy. And if you're not going to use the energy, then you're going to store it. And that's where the more you store, the harder it is going to be, the more effort you're going to have. So the more of this you've got, the more of that you're going to have to do to get rid of it. So it's keeping on top of it, keeping the exercise regime just ahead of what you're feeding for, and keeping it. So all of these little things that all feed into the same thing. It's not just about what hangs in the hay net or what goes in the bucket or how much turnout. It's the whole thing. It's a full-on program. So there we go. So what we put in the bucket, what we put on their backs, and how often we get on their backs. All of that gives you a pretty much a well-rounded way of managing your pony's weight. But the key thing that I just want to massively stress is check them now. Everybody do a body condition score, do a weigh tape check, whatever it takes. Just be objective, because I'm really nervous that we've probably got quite a few problems with laminitis, and I see some really heartbreaking things in the shop